Well, y'all, it took me about 4 months, but I have finally watched The Iron Claw. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to my movie review of The Iron Claw. I felt like the least I could do was come up and give you guys a mic drop on this movie because I really put off watching this. Finally, last night, Elizabeth mentioned to me that we should probably think about watching this movie at some point. And you guys know that I don't like dark shit. I usually don't like these type of movies or TV shows, but I'm kind of obligated to watch this one, just like I'm obligated to watch all the Dark Side of the Rings and all the other gnarly stuff we talk about on this channel. It's kind of my job, so I felt like I owe you guys a review on The Iron Claw. And after watching it, I gotta say, it was a really good movie. It was a good movie. I wouldn't say it was a great movie. I'm not even going to say it's a movie that I'm going to watch again, but I thought that it was really well done, and I thought the depiction of the Von Erich family, even though there are some serious omissions that I'm going to get into, I thought they did a pretty good job with it, to the point where I think a non-wrestling fan can watch this movie and still come away with the same opinion that we do in terms of it being a good movie. I think the show stealer in terms of casting on this movie was Holt McCallany, who played Fritz Von Erich. He was tremendous in this movie. He looked a lot like him, spoke a lot like him, had the same body style and shape as him, and he's one of the only castings of this movie where they just got spot on. The Harley Race one wasn't bad either, but in terms of the brothers, even though I think every actor who played the role of the various Von Erich brothers did a great job, Kevin Von Erich and Carrie Von Erich, played by Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White, were great in their roles, but physically they looked nothing like either one of those brothers. David Von Erich, however, I thought was a well-done casting there. But Fritz really stood out to me, where if you were looking at him from far away or with blurry vision, it really looks like him. You know how in the Dark Side of the Ring episodes, when they're reenacting, events, everything's very blurry, and a lot of those stunt doubles and those body doubles look amazing. And in this movie, it was kind of hard to hide a lot of that, but the Fritz casting, I thought, was spot on. I think the movie did a really good job of focusing on the brotherly love and the brotherly bond that all of these brothers had with each other, despite being in an extremely stressful environment in their family. A very demanding father, a very delusional and crazy father. It was really frustrating. This movie kind of made you mad. I mean, obviously it was sad, deeply sad, but it also pissed you off because they were not shy about depicting Fritz as the true asshole that he really was. I think this man was very deranged, and the shit he put his family through is unthinkable in a lot of ways. And I think the movie did a good job of illustrating that in terms of, how maniacal Fritz could be and how manipulative he could be, and how he made no bones about telling his sons which ones were the favorites, and the rankings and all of that was really crazy. And then, of course, the story at the end with him skimming money off the top for years and years from WCCW, which they made a point to acknowledge in the movie as well. But honestly, they left a lot of stuff out. And what's so crazy about the Von Erich family and the Von Erich story is that all of the tragedy that they depicted in The Iron Claw wasn't even all of it. They completely left out a brother. They left out Chris Von Erich, who shot himself in the head in 1991. They mostly combined Chris's story with Mike's story, as the two of them kind of were linked a little bit. But the fact that they completely omitted and left a brother, a full brother, out was pretty mind-blowing, and that was tough to get past. But to the casual viewer, for someone who doesn't know the Von Erich history like many of us do, probably no harm done. But that's pretty wild that Chris, who is a big part of the story, wasn't mentioned at all. And I think aside from that omission, the actors playing the roles of the Von Erich boys and the bond and the love and the heartache and the sadness, I thought everybody did a tremendous job in their respective roles, even if the casting was a little bit off in terms of the brothers. There were some other castings, like the Ric Flair one, for example, that was so bonkers you had to wonder what the writers were even smoking with that one. But in terms of the core characters, the Von Erich family, I thought it was all really well cast. Now, of course, Kevin Von Erich, the story is mostly told from his perspective. He's played by Zac Efron, who really got himself jacked to the point where I think he was even more jacked than Kevin Von Erich. Now, Kevin was always in good shape, but he was more of a finesse kind of athlete, you know, wrestled barefoot, very smooth, and he wasn't quite as jacked. I thought Zac Efron looked a lot like a Billy Jack Haynes or even a Hercules more than a Kevin Von Erich. But in terms of the job he did in the role, I don't know much about Zac Efron. I've not really seen him in anything except for, I forgot what it was, that dirty movie with Robert De Niro a few years ago where he has this big Andre the Giant quote at the end of the movie, real raunchy comedy. Forgot what that's called. I think he was in that, but I haven't seen Zac Efron in anything. So I don't know what kind of actor he is, what kind of acting chops he has, but I thought he did a great job in this role of just, kind of embracing the heartache and the hurt that, we know Kevin Von Erich has suffered. And I think Kevin was a part of this movie too, offering his influence on how he wants this story told. So I'm sure him and Zac probably spent some time together. Now, Zac was way too short, but he was still very jacked. But I think you can look past. I think the only people who are going to really nitpick the size differences here are the crazy fans like us. If a casual viewer is watching this movie, they're not going to notice that Kevin and Carrie are very small in this role. Now, Carrie Von Erich was played by Jeremy Allen White, which is interesting because I just started watching Shameless. Never seen Shameless before. Me and Elizabeth are about 7 episodes into season 1, and Jeremy Allen White is in that show. He plays Lip, and he's a lot bigger here, but he's only like 5'6", 5'7", something like that. Carrie Von Erich is over 6 feet tall, so I dare say we got 5 to 6 to even 7 perhaps inches difference between real life Carrie Von Erich and fictional Carrie Von Erich, which is tough to look at. But the rest of Jeremy Allen White, his hair, even his face, even though there was a huge height differential there, I still thought the casting was pretty good, and I enjoyed Jeremy Allen White in the role. Like I said, I put over Holt McCallany as much as I could. I really feel like he stole the show. He stole the movie. He was tremendous in the role of Fritz Von Erich. Cannot say enough good things about his performance. Now, the mom, Doris, was played by Maura Tierney. I remember her from News Radio, the sitcom back in the 90s that Phil Hartman was on when he passed away. She played the mother and did a very good job playing that role as well. They really showed you how dysfunctional the parents were, and it amazes me that the brothers were able to keep such a strong bond, knowing how, the father played them against each other and the mom was really shut off. And the parents really, several times, especially Fritz throughout the movie, told the boys no matter how crazy the problems they were having, even if one of them was worried that the other one was going to commit suicide, their answer was always it's between you boys, y'all work it out. That's just was their answer to everything. And it was frustrating because with a lot of these brothers, many of them would still be alive today if they would have had any other parents other than these two fuckers. That's for sure. We had some interesting cameos from wrestlers as well. MJF was in this movie, but in a non-speaking role. We only caught a glimpse of him for a minute in the ring when he was tagging with Kevin Von Erich, Zac Efron, and MJF was playing Lance Von Erich. Now, Lance Von Erich is the fictional nephew of Fritz, and we just got a brief glimpse of MJF in the movie. I believe he had more scenes that were cut. So we only saw him for a split second, and they didn't even explain who he was. Chavo Guerrero was also in the movie. He played the Sheik, and I didn't even notice this until I was looking up the cast, some of the names here, because I wanted to get the name of the actor who played Fritz, and I didn't even notice that Ryan Nemeth was playing Gino Hernandez. And I remember Gino was cutting a promo in the movie, and it did not register to me that that was Ryan Nemeth, so that was really cool. Another great casting choice, at least in an interview segment holding the title, was Harley Race. Didn't get this actor's name, but whoever played him was spot on. When they first cut to him in that Harley Race jacket holding the NWA title, much like Fritz, from just a little bit of a distance, it looked exactly like Harley. Now, they showed some footage of him wrestling in the ring, and I thought Harley Race the real Harley Race was in much better shape than the actor playing him, but facially and just the way he had the look down with the suit and the NWA title, spot fucking on. You know what was not spot fucking on? Ric Flair. Was this a joke? Was this a joke? Because this movie was so deep, so dark, so sad, so intense. And then you have a casting like this, even for non-wrestling fans who don't know wrestling, who might be watching this movie. I dare say that even they know enough about Ric Flair to know that this guy ain't nothing like him at all. I mean, we were chuckling at how ridiculous this was. And it was hard to laugh during a movie that's, so not funny. But this was probably the worst casting choice I've ever seen. I feel like they could have done better. This guy had the hair and, he had a lot of energy, but his mannerisms, his voice, nothing was really matching. His size, not a good representation of Ric Flair at all. But again, I found it more comical than anything else. So it's not really something that bothered me because the movie wasn't about Ric Flair. The movie wasn't about Harley Race. It was about the Von Erich brothers and the story they're trying to tell there. So nitpicking about the accuracy of an actor playing somebody else is not going to be something I'm going to be too mad about in a bit part. But if they would have had a casting on one of the brothers so off base like that, it might have turned the movie off. But luckily, we only had a few seconds of this Ric Flair, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. Now, in terms of the omissions and the inaccuracies, like I said earlier, the biggest one was the fact that they left out a complete brother that also died via suicide, via gunshot wound, self-inflicted. The fact that they left him out completely was crazy. We'll talk more about that in a second. But also Jack Jr., the first ever son, who they did acknowledge passed away when he was a child. They didn't really say how. Now, all the way back in 1959, when Jack Jr. was only 6 years old, he was outside playing and got electrocuted when he touched a wire or something, and he fell face first into a pool of water or snow and drowned. And he was the first brother that died very, very young. But also, David Von Erich, something else that wasn't mentioned in the movie, he had a daughter who died of SIDS after only 13 weeks. So 13 weeks old, his daughter dies of sudden infant death syndrome. So, when you hear about not only the brothers and all of their tragedies, but also there's young kids that are also just randomly dying. I'm not one to really believe in curses, but you do have to at least think about some of this stuff. I mean, it's just almost too crazy to believe that this much tragedy, this much heartache and heartbreak could happen to one family. It's nuts. Now, the movie does talk about David Von Erich's death. He, of course, died in Japan, and there's always been, a rumored story and the family story. And in the movie, they kind of went with the family story that he died of some intestinal issue. And they also talked about him not feeling well before going to Japan. He was puking up blood at Kevin's wedding, and Kevin talked to him, "I don't think you should go," and he went anyway. However, when he was found dead, there were some substances in his system, and there's also the story that Bruiser Brody went in there and flushed, I think it was the Placidil, these sleep enhancers or whatever they were, that all the brothers were hooked on, and got rid of some of the drugs in the room when he was found dead. But they didn't really show any of that. A lot of these tragedies, they didn't show at all. They didn't show the brothers actually dying. They just kind of show the aftermath, and they show Kevin coming in and Fritz telling him that Kevin died in Japan because of an intestinal thing. So they set that up in the movie with him puking up blood. And I think the real story is a little bit more complicated than that, but I can understand them wanting to, push that narrative. And of course, as we know, David Von Erich was gearing up for a title shot, an NWA title match against Ric Flair at Texas Stadium that would then turn into a David Von Erich tribute show, and Kerry Von Erich would get the shot instead, and that's when he won the NWA title with the backslide. Still to this day, the only match I've seen end with a backslide, and Kerry Von Erich beat Ric Flair in Texas Stadium for the NWA title. I remember as a kid seeing the photos from that match and being amazed by it. Now, Kerry Von Erich only held the title for like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, something like that. Super short run that he had, dropped it right back to Ric Flair in Japan. I think it was just a feel-good moment for the Von Erichs, because even in those days, Kerry had his issues. He was already, into the drugs. He had reliability issues, and I think the NWA wasn't going to be able to trust him to hold the championship for very long. So they sent him to Japan, where David died, to drop the belt back to Ric Flair. So it was a short-lived NWA title run for Kerry, but it did exist. Now, in the movie, they mess up the timeline with his injury. In the movie, he is champion. He lays the belt down on the table, on the kitchen table in front of Kevin. And Kevin might have some jealousy issues with not getting that shot himself. And that's when Kerry says he's going to go out for a little ride. And they show him on the motorcycle getting in the accident. And then they fast forward, a year or so later, and they show him with the amputation. But he didn't get in that motorcycle accident until like 2 years after he lost the NWA title, not the same week. And the amputation came later. The amputation came when he tried to get back on his feet too early and fucked up his recovery, and they had to amputate his foot from there. Now, in the movie, they had the foot cut off pretty high up the ankle. I always thought it like it was a partial foot amputation, but the whole foot might have been gone. I don't remember, but he had a prosthetic. But I was surprised in the movie that they depicted the amputation way up higher on the leg than I thought Kerry had, and they really showed Kerry's struggles with trying to adjust to the prosthetic and all of that. So they had the timeline on Kerry's injury all messed up there. I think part of the reason why Mike and Chris's stories were kind of combined is because they both kind of had similar issues with wrestling. Chris was just really, really small and frail, but wanted to be a wrestler and loved wrestling, just wasn't cutting the mustard and was feeling the pressure from his father and whatnot, and that kind of led to his downfall. Mike also had kind of a weaker body. He looked like he was completely out of place, did not want to be in wrestling, was more interested in music. And they did do a good job of showing how he was in a band and he was getting gigs, and that was really his love. And it's funny too, because the Hart family had one brother. Was it Ross? No, I don't think it was Ross. Wayne. I think it was, no, it wasn't Wayne either. I can't remember what Hart brother it is. I think it's the one that passed away. No, I do think it was Wayne. But there was one Hart brother that just had other aspirations. He was more into promoting, more into music, and just doing things outside of wrestling. And I think Mike Von Erich was a lot like that, but he felt the pressure from Fritz. Fritz was basically just telling him, you are going to be a wrestler. Fritz had a lot of his own insecurities, a lot of times that he didn't make it to the top, and I think he was using his sons, to live vicariously through them for them to succeed where he failed. And he was literally using them as his puppets, just to satisfy his own shortcomings in his own career. And it's really frustrating, to watch him do this in this movie, but that's the way he was. And with Mike, he got injured in the ring, hurt his shoulder or something, went in for routine surgery, and he suffered from toxic shock syndrome and nearly died. They even told the family to go in and say their goodbyes and whatnot. And he pulls through and then gets back in the ring. And he's clearly had issues with his speech and he's not really ready yet, just continues to feel the pressure, and also is very much hooked on the Placidil. And it was a little inaccurate in this movie because they actually do show Mike doing the deed. He just takes the whole bottle of pills and he's standing in front of a bathroom mirror and he dumps the whole bottle of pills down his throat and just washes it, just chugs a beer with it. But in reality, he took a bottle of pills out to a lake and just drank the pills and fell asleep and died next to the lake. So that was a little bit inaccurate. And then, like I said, leaving Chris completely out was just really baffling to me, although I kind of understand why the directors may have done that. This would have been 3 or 4 years later after Mike's death, and Mike and Chris were very, very close. And Chris, of course, was feeling the pressure, of Fritz. And he ended up dying a lot like Kerry Von Erich. He went out to the farm or whatever, or the property, and shot himself in the head. And it was Kevin Von Erich and his mom who found him. None of this was mentioned in the movie at all. And I guess Chris and Mike's story was kind of meant to be intertwined a little bit. But, if I'm a family member here, I'm not sure how I would feel about this, about Chris being completely left out. But that just goes to show you, and it's such a great illustration of how tragic this story is, that it's so fucking gnarly that they just have to cut out one suicide just so it's not too much. That's just messed up, man. Really, really messed up. So Mike Von Erich, his suicide around 87. I think Chris's was in 1991. And then Kerry Von Erich, the way they depicted him in the movie, like I said, they had the timeline wrong with the injury and the amputation. And they did show a little bit of footage of him winning the Intercontinental title. There was a couple of matches I was wondering how they were going to depict, because when Kerry won the title from Ric Flair in Texas Stadium doesn't exist anymore. So it's not like you can replicate that the way they did with the Sportatorium. And it's going to be really hard to shoot those scenes, especially with that particular guy playing Ric Flair, but they don't show any match footage except for a wide shot of people watching on television, and then you hear some dubbed over announcers announcing Kerry Von Erich is the new champion. They did the same thing for the SummerSlam match. I think it shows Kevin and Fritz watching SummerSlam together on the TV, and then it's not Howard Finkel announcing Kerry Von Erich. It's not WWE's audio. It's WWE's visual footage, but for some reason it's a different audio announcing Kerry Von Erich as the Intercontinental Champion. There's even a scene at the house at Christmas time. He gives Fritz Von Erich a gun that Fritz is not too pleased with. He's got a ton of guns, but he's like, yeah, thank you, son. It's beautiful. He's like, why don't you want to go shoot it? And he goes, I don't want to shoot it. And they get in this argument, and they don't really talk much else about Kerry's WWE career until I think they fire him or he gets released. And then the movie gets into his death. And his death was accurate by a couple of points. Number one, he shot himself in the heart. And number two, he used the gun that he gave to Fritz as a present. And they did include that in the movie. So that's legit. Now, what's not accurate is Kevin Von Erich finding Kerry and then Fritz walking up, and then Kevin attacks Fritz and chokes him and all of that. What really happened was that Fritz found Kerry. So there was this big dramatic scene in the movie where Kevin picks up Kerry and it's heartbreaking to watch this shit. Walks him into the house, lays him on the kitchen table, and just holds his hand. And that's where I think Zac Efron really, did a great job in this role, because you really felt his pain just having to live with the memories that this guy must have and must think about and live with every single day, the type of dreams this man must have. I can't even imagine. There's this heart-wrenching part at the end of the movie with Zac Efron with his two sons who both wrestle. They've both been on AEW recently. So Kevin Von Erich's sons wrestle. And this was the one part of the movie where I'm like, oh my God, holy shit, So that was just rough, because you just can't even, I don't think one person can really fathom this level of tragedy. We've all, gone through tragedy and lost lots of loved ones, and close friends and spouses and pets and brothers and sisters and moms and dads and grandmas. We've all gone through that. But have any of us gone through as much as this? Probably not. And that ending shot there, they did a good job, I think, at least ending on a positive note. There's another movie that I hate that I watched like 15 years ago that I'm still mad that I watched, Marley and Me. I still resent watching that movie. Like, oh my God, that was just so heartbreaking. But I remember at the end of that movie, like, there's this nice scene where Owen Wilson is, got his family and they're kind of walking into the house together, and, they're all still happy and together and they love each other despite how damn sad it was when that fucking dog died. And with, Kevin Von Erich at the end of the Iron Claw, realizing that he still has his family and he's watching his sons, and they even were holding him when he was hugging him. And they're like, we'll be your brother's daddy, that type of thing. At least it ended on, somewhat of a positive note, but man, oh man, was it just a really, really dark story that, we've always known about, but seeing it in movie form, is even harder to swallow, in a lot of ways. But I think the movie did well with a lot of the wrestling footage that they did. I thought they did a good job of capturing the essence and the atmosphere of the old Sportatorium. Like I said, some of these wrestler castings were a little bit off, but some weren't bad. And the Harley one I thought was very good. I also thought it was cool how they loosely depicted Jerry Jarrett buying the company, which I think the real story is that was more of a merger, and that formed USWA. And they would be on ESPN for a time as well. So, they had some of the history correct. They had some of the history wrong. I'm glad that they did include the part about Fritz taking money and then basically admits it right to Kevin in the movie. He goes, I did. He goes, you think this was a free ride? I took what I deserved. So basically I stole because I felt like I was entitled to it, is what he openly and proudly admits. What a dick. What a fucking dick. There's very, very, very little, pretty much nothing at all to like about Fritz von Erich. We've had some shitty wrestling fathers. I think the all-time worst wrestling father by far, hands down, is Grizzly Smith. But Fritz ain't far off. There you go. There's my review on The Iron Claw. I thought it was good. It's a movie I'm never going to watch again. I don't like being reminded of these type of things, especially with the Von Erichs. Their story is so unbelievably sad, and now that it's been 40 years since, you know, the tragedy really started getting rolling with that family, this is a story that I've had to hear about and relive over and over. And we've heard, you know, the Von Erich tales told to us many, many times over the last 4 decades, and it never gets any easier. This was a very, very well done movie. It was well acted. It was well written. If I compare it to The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke, I think maybe the Wrestler is going to be widely considered probably the better movie if I had to take a amateur guess, and I'm no movie buff, but I feel like The Wrestler is probably a little more highly regarded than this movie. But this movie was still good. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like Oscar worthy or anything, but there were some show-stealing performances, like I said, with Fritz and Zac Efron. I thought did a great job as Kevin Von Erich, and it was a very, very sad story. Anyway, let me know what you think of this movie in the comments below, and thanks for joining me today on this very rare movie review. I'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.